Well, with Greek culture, the West really takes off. We have the Kouros, the early statues of young men, and you can see that the early statues have the same positioning as the Egyptian statues and look very, very stiff. Early Greek art is what we refer to as Cyclitic art or geometric art. You can see here from this little statuette of a woman that it looks like a geometric figure. It's not very realistic. It doesn't even look like a woman. It just looks like a series of blocks and cubes put together. And then the art begins to grow into something more naturalistic. I wanted you to take a look at the Egyptian Empire, the Greek Empire. As you can see to the west is Persia, and the Persian Empire extends from Asia almost into Europe. Greece is in the sort of the bottom panhandle of Europe, 1,000 miles away from Italy. And here you can see at its greatest stretch, the Greek Empire stretches up into Europe, crosses almost over into Constantinople and into the Persian Empire, is in Upper Europe. And here we are later as the Greek Empire stretches out into what we call the Hellenization era. The Hellenization era is the era in which the Greek culture is spreading across Europe and into Asia. And this is after the Greek Empire sort of dissipated. This is an earlier Minoan work of fresco, that's a painting on plaster. And this is what's called the Toreador frescoes, in which women actually danced or jumped over or leaped over bulls. And this was perhaps a sporting event. Here's a snake goddess from Minoan culture, too. It shows a woman bare-breasted holding snakes, suggesting that women had power in society. A snake, perhaps a phallic symbol, women having power over men, women's bare breasts exposed, indicating that they have feminine power. This is a Corbel dome. This is the treasury of Atreus, one of the monumental sculptures and structures of the ancient Minoan culture. And you can see the size of the people inside this Corbel dome. Corbel just means it's rounded, as you can see from this structure here. It's a rounded dome, but it's basically stonework that's laid one on top of another to kind of create the doming effect. And this is sort of within a tomb, within the walls of a larger structure. This is a Minoan mask made of gold, and of course gold is very soft, so you actually used carving tools to carve this mask, maybe based on a human face, or maybe just a mask as a ceremonial mask that was used. And here we get the sense of the Greek adventurers themselves. Here they are on the Argos. This is the Jason and the Argonauts. And of course, the most important of these adventurers, of course, is Odysseus, the subject of Homer's book. Homer wrote two books, the Iliad and the Odyssey, about 50 years apart. So he was probably a young man when he wrote one and an older man when he wrote the second book. And here we are, all these suitors that have come to take Odysseus' wife. Odysseus is slaying them all when he eventually comes home from the Trojan War. He's kept away from his wife for 20 years because he's the one that came up with the idea of the Trojan horse, and the gods did not want a complete victory for the Greeks, and they did not want the Trojans to be slaughtered, but Odysseus outsmarted the gods, and for this he was punished with a 10-year absence from his wife. Here he is inside the cave of the giant Polyphemus, the Cyclops. Eventually this Polyphemus eats people, but eventually Odysseus outwits him. He gets him drunk, he blinds him, and he gets his men to escape by wearing sheep's clothing, literally. This is Sean Bean playing Odysseus in the movie Troy. He's one of the major characters in the film, and in the film he does come up with the idea of the Trojan horse. This is a sculpture of Odysseus showing how ravished he is by his own wits. He's smart, but he is also ravished in this scene, probably because he's listening to the sirens. Famously, he decides that he wants to hear the sirens, even though they're supposed to send men to their deaths. So he's on board a ship, and he tells his men to plug their ears and tie him to the mast so that he can hear the sirens coming out of the water singing to him. And they almost drive him insane, but because he's tied to the mast, he can't do any harm, but he tries to wreck the ship anyhow. This is a Greek vase sculpture, and what they do is they basically draw on a sculpture, they draw on a vase, but they draw with yellow kind of clay, and then they scratch it out to get the black underneath. Then they reverse this. A few years later, they decided to reverse this, and they would basically have a black clay or a black base, and then they would draw or paint with what they call red figures on the black clay, and this would allow them to make more specific figures. As you can see over time, the Greek statuary really increased. This is still kind of a stiff-looking statue. It looks very Egyptian in form, but it's a boy statue. It's called a Kouros statue. And over time, as you can see, the statues become more lifelike. We have now a later Kouros boy, and now he has more lifelike arms. He still has that one leg forward like in the Egyptian statues, but his face is more rounded, appears to be more human. He has more flesh on his bones that appears to be more normal flesh. And then later you'll see the headdress becomes even less ceremonial. The face becomes more open and more friendly. The face and the genitalia and all aspects become more like a real live human, much less like a structure from some template. And then we get to even a later boy, and we can see here that his musculature is very much like a real boy. The arms, of course, the hands are missing, but the genitalia, the legs, even though the leg format is still very much like the Egyptian format, the face is kind of gentler. And here we have a Kore, which is a female sculpture, and here you can see in this early Cyclitic form, almost geometric. The hair is ceremonial. The hair isn't very realistic at all. The hand looks very, very stiff. Even though the woman's supposed to be, I guess, partially naked, she doesn't look very realistic. Then this statue, the hair looks a little bit more attractive and alive. The woman is giving what's called the archaic smile, a smile that seems to hint at some sort of pleasure, but we don't know what it is, and she appears to be wearing a dress. And then we move into a stronger form in which the flowing cloth appears to be more flowing. Again, the archaic smile, almost a Hindu or almost a Asian influence. The hair flows more naturally. The face seems more sculpted. The arms and legs seem to move more naturally. And then we get to the Acropolis, the great achievement in Greek architecture, the high hill above Athens, in which we have the various buildings of the Acropolis, the buildings of state for the Greek Empire of the Athenians in Athens. We have, of course, the Parthenon, which is the major temple. Here there was probably a statue to Pallas Athena. The statue is long gone. There is a Pallas Athena statue in the Parthenon in Nashville, and it's the only full-sized edition of that you can see in the world. This is an example of the friezes or the statues that adorned the front of the Parthenon. Many of these statues still adorn the Parthenon in the 19th century, but English Egyptologists or Greektologists actually stole the statues and took them to the British Museum in England, where they reside today. So some of the statues are actually there. Some of the statues are in France, and some of the statues are in Germany, and of course Greece wants them back. These are the three styles of temple. This is the Ionic column, the Doric column, the Corinthian column. The Corinthian is the most ornate. The Ionic column is in between. The Doric column is the most plain and unattractive of the three column styles. Over time, the Greeks moved from the Doric column, the very simple column, to the Ionic column, a little bit more attractive, with a little bit more ornamentation, to the Corinthian column, which is extremely oriented, has lots of flowers and stuff at the top and bottom of the column. And here you see more friezes from the Parthenon in a modern building in which and here are some of the friezes. I've actually been to the British Museum, and here's some of the friezes from the Parthenon that were stolen by the British and do exist today in the British Museum. Pretty good picture. I actually have a picture of some people kissing in front of this, which is kind of fun to watch, but I didn't bring that picture with me today. And here are more friezes from the Parthenon in the British Museum from a different angle. And you can see the clothing. Praxiteles, who is the great sculptor who apparently is responsible for many of these, actually draped the clothing so that even though it's stone, it appears to actually move. Again, here's another example. This is what's called the Kritos boy, another example of a more realistic sculptural style from the Greeks that occurs around the 3rd or 4th century BC, and a very, very beautiful sculpture of a man. And then we begin to have pictures of the Olympiad. This is Olympiad pictures that probably adorned a Voss, and you can see men running here in the Olympics. The Olympics were famous because they challenged people to be their best mentally and physically. Here again, men probably doing a decathlon or doing actually, where they actually grab a baton and then give it to one runner and they do a triathlon together. Very interesting. Then we're going to see a discus thrower, which of course becomes the subject of a very famous sculpture, but the discus thrower adorns coins and medals and doors, and again it's one of those great elements of Greek sculpture that suggests that physical acumen is just as important as mental acumen, that healthy mind and healthy body, and here's a good example of the discus thrower actually in a museum. And as you can see, the way the body is wound up is extremely realistic, and yet the body is at its fullest and most clearly strongest and most powerful. So, and again here we have two examples by Praxiteles, Pallas Athena. We have Athena to the left, a very beautiful woman, but she is not only is she naked, but she is the embodiment of wisdom. And here we have a spear thrower, although the spear seems to be gone from his hand on the right. And here we have the great theater at Epidaurus. Probably can hold 20 to 30,000 people. And again, as you can see, all the people down below, these are just stone seats, and people had to project their voices out into the stone, but the stone helped them project. Here's the great lineage of the great philosophers. Socrates in the center, the first of the great philosophers, followed by his student Plato, and then on the right we have the great Aristotle, the great mind. And this is the famous Raphael painting, The School of Athens, in which apparently you have Socrates and Plato walking through the School of Athens, talking, and in the foreground I think you might even have parodies of contemporary artists. I think even Michelangelo is kind of grumpy in there. And then you have an example here of how important music was to the Greeks. You have a flute player and a lyre player and people singing, and the muses of music were very important to the Greeks, and music was very important to their culture. Then in the later Greek period, we have the period of Alexander, the great king, who only lasted to the age of 33, drank himself to excess, came down with a cold, turned into flu, turned into pneumonia, eventually killed him. But he had fought so many battles, he was exhausted from his years of ruling. This is Alexander's empire at its greatest extent. As you can see here, it extends into India, it extends almost up into Russia, it extends through the Mediterranean into the Arabian states, into parts of Europe, down into Africa. This is the Nike of Samothrace. This is a statue that is in the Louvre. My students, when they went to the Louvre, wanted to see the Mona Lisa, so they literally, even though it was the end of the hallway in a prime position and people just go just to see this, my students rushed by it on their way out. And as you can see, here it is in the Louvre. This is where it's located in the Louvre, so it's in a perfect position for people to stand and stare at it for hours. But my students just sort of rushed by so they could see the Mona Lisa. But of course, this, of course, is the great, great statue that many people come to see instead. This is the Laocoon. And as you can see, the agonized look on his face, the part of the arm here is gone. But the Laocoon and his sons knew that the Trojan horse was a dangerous weapon brought by the Greeks, and they tried to ward the Trojans, but the gods sent snakes to stop them, and the snakes, of course, killed Laocoon and his sons before they could warn the people of Troy. And this marvelous sculpture represents Greek sculpture reaching its most realistic phase. As you can see, the characters look truly tortured as they're surrounded by the snakes that are sort of going to devour them. And this gives you a little sense of their Greek culture.